What is good? Osiris here, stuck in the middle. Thanks for joining. Shout out to Den Henson. I didn't know what to think about this George Floyd statue getting vandalized because I've talked about it already and I'm not going to rehash that. But Den Henson, but I knew I had emotions and thoughts about it. Den Henson brought it out in me when I didn't even know what it was. Den said a comment on my video. Den Henson said, a vandalized statue of George Floyd is poetic in its own way. Den, big shout out. That's the take for me. George Floyd at the time of his death was filled with meth, COVID, fentanyl, had a criminal record, resisted arrest, had fake money, lost both of his jobs, one of them due to unconstitutional lockdowns, was killed in the custody of clown-ass police, and his death was politicized. What sums up our times better than this? Now I bring to you the New York Times. They have an article titled, George Floyd statue vandalized in Union Square. Sculptures of Mr. Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and John Lewis are on display in a Manhattan park known as a site of protests. These monuments have meaning, Mr. Floyd's brother said. This is byline by Precious Fondren. In Union Square, Terrence Floyd, a brother of George Floyd, whose murder in May 2020 by a police officer prompted confrontations over police brutality and racial injustice, spoke softly into a microphone. These monuments have meaning, Mr. Floyd said on Friday night as he stood among large sculptures of his brother, Representative John Lewis and Breonna Taylor. But then 2 days later, around 10:15 a.m. on Sunday, broad daylight, a man with a black backpack rode a skateboard up to the statue of George Floyd and splashed the face with gray paint, the police said. The police were investigating the incident, which they say was caught on surveillance video. And here's a picture of the statue which was vandalized. Den Henson said it perfectly. The statue is even more representative of our time. The vandalism that I don't condone, it's not productive, it's not sophisticated, it doesn't help anything, it's a waste of time, it's disrespectful, there's nothing about it that I can approve. But it's very similar to something that I do. I wouldn't chant myself, but I don't disapprove of. It's the Let's Go Brandon chant that we're hearing all over the country. That is the same. The vandalizing the George Floyd statue is the physical representation of the Let's Go Brandon chant. We can chant Let's Go Brandon all we want and really mean it something towards the president. This is something that I would never have condoned, and I still don't condone, if somebody did a chant like "We love Obama" in the same way that they did it for Brandon. I wouldn't condone it. But for Biden, since that speech on September 9th, I think he should have been impeached that same night. That's how bad that speech was on September 9th. But here's what happens. People do this, they do this Let's Go Brandon chant. And it's an act of defiance, same as, I can't speak for who did it, but that's what it represents to me, an act of defiance of throwing that paint on George Floyd's statue. But at the end of the day, I'm closing with this. We can chant, "We love Brandon" or "Let's Go Brandon," but Biden didn't campaign for the 2020 election. Barely ran a campaign at all. His campaign was to not campaign, which was smart. Staying in the basement, figuratively out of the public eye. He has a much worse history on racial issues than 45 ever did. I've done multiple videos on that. It's way worse. He was clearly unfit mentally for the position at the time. We knew it before. And yet, he received the most votes in the history of American general elections. I don't think we fully absorbed what that means. What that means is they can do whatever they want. And a lot of people know it. That's why they're chanting those chants and they're throwing the paint on George Floyd, because that's all we can do at this point. We're too divided, don't have a organized system or plan or process. and that's all it represents. The statue is even more appropriate. Take care.